can you pick up that question and respond via text? You also have an opportunity of engaging the audience further in the lounge on table 4. We've set up table 4 for you to engage your audience on various other questions that they may have or comments that they may have. I am going to swiftly then move to our next speaker, who is Mr. Charles Kateeba. I believe he is ready for me. Charles is the chairman of Kiijura Reach Logistics, and he will be talking to us about addressing vandalism to enhance railway safety and security. We have heard a lot about vandalism, and Misila has emphasized how we need to be taking responsibility in looking after our own infrastructure. So the next presentation will be talking about addressing vandalism to enhance railway security. Mr. Charles Kateeba.
Thank you. As introduced, my name is Charles Kateeba. I'm the former managing director of Uganda Railways Corporation, and I'm currently working as the chairman Kiijura Reach Logistics, located in Port Portal City, west of Uganda. As you all will agree, vandalism and rail safety are connected. Sometimes we mention these words concurrently, but don't put much emphasis on them. But in recent years, it has become very, very increasingly important to focus on the issue of vandalism in order to address safety. If I may borrow the words of Lord Frank Davis, preventing trespass and vandalism on the railway is one of the most important safety priorities for the rail industry. He said this while he was addressing a committee on railway safety, and especially as regard to level crossings. Now, vandalism may occur spontaneously, but often is a result of or aided by or abetted by encroachment and trespass, which seriously impair railway security. We will focus on vandalism that affects safety directly or indirectly. Next slide. Now, we need to look at the major causes of vandalism. Why has it become, in recent times, more pronounced and very important? You will all agree that there's been a major global shift from rail to road in the last 20 to 25 years in particular, maybe going up to 30 years. This has reduced the direct investment that goes into rail infrastructure development, but also in operational costs, whereby, for example, level crossing management and rate of way maintenance has reduced in terms of human presence. The economic restructuring of state enterprises as a result of the above has led to over-concentration of operational and commercial returns by state-owned enterprises and PPP operators. Also, there is a major shift from manual to mechanized maintenance, which leads to the loss of first-line defense by track maintenance gangs that often live with their families along the line. Uncontrolled urbanization is another contributor, because the homeless or poor urban dwellers often invade the expansive rail reserve for markets, makeshift kiosks, and temporary shelters. This is abetted by politics of patronage, Politicians often directly or indirectly encourage encroachment of these poor urban dwellers, and even in the rural areas, encroachment that takes the form of farming or temporary activity is often supported by local politicians in return for votes. In the developing countries or the recipient funding countries, there has been also a lot of indulgence by development agencies, especially the multilateral and Western donors and lenders, who insist on mandatory compensation of all project affected persons, irrespective of how they came to the affected area. This encourages new arrivals and economic agents hoping to cash in on the compensation that comes with the new projects. But the most difficult to manage are actually hardcore criminals. In many cities, especially vagabonds and drug addicts, and in the rural areas, especially in war-affected areas, there are people who specifically target rail infrastructure and installations, both just to let off their steam, but sometimes for the scrap and other fixtures that they can use for sale for their own benefit. Finally, I want to talk about the economic opportunities. Large scrap dealers and steel processors in particular, and minor white metal smiths such as aluminium or bronze, they also target these targets. I mean, they buy the scrap that has been taken from our facilities and installations. But they also land grabbers who use vandalism as a front to access the rail and then later annex some of those lands in a more legal way. Next slide. What are the major types of vandalism that affect rail safety? We are looking at the track and its fixtures, bridges, culverts, signaling, power lines, terminals and stations. The track, when disrupted, and the bridges and signaling, they often lead to serious service disruptions, in some cases to catastrophic derailment. Rolling stock, in my part of the world, because our locomotives are predominantly diesel, there is a lot of fuel siphoning, but also where locomotives or wagons are parked in remote areas, we have loss of major components such as couplers, cables, brake shoes, and other linkages. Again, these lead to service disruptions, but also can lead to huge economic costs of maintenance. So where we have to replace these components. We look at also the communication systems, masts, power supply, solar panels, batteries, cables, etc. These lead to severe disruptions and communicated related accidents. Again, the next slide gives the examples of vandalism broken down into infrastructure and then rolling stock. It's not uncommon in recent times to hear a whole station being vandalized or a bridge. I've heard of a bridge, I think in one European country, that was completely stolen overnight. We'll quickly go to the next slide. So, what are the solutions to vandalism? I've broken down the solutions according to the causes. Now, how do we address the global market shift from railroad to transport? In my opinion, we have to make rail relevant in order to attract new investments. We have to make it smart. We make it address the needs of the people, especially both freighters and passengers, such that we can do almost similar or better than the road services. In order to address the economic restructuring that has led to over-concentration on operation and commercial returns, we need to review the structure to ensure that adequate infrastructure protection is maintained and not only focus at the returns, but make sure, especially the state, does not neglect its responsibility of maintaining the infrastructure and making investments to renew the infrastructure, even improve it. We also need to make sure that where mechanized maintenance has been adopted, it is adopted together with smart surveillance and rapid response systems, such as satellite, drone, remote sensing. In order to control urbanization that spills over to our railway system, we need to involve local communities in planning the new developments or improvements on the existing systems to take care of the communities around them. Involving the communities might involve, for example, together with the local communities, creating housing in railway reserves that the community may take advantage of, and therefore feel that they are part of the system. Next slide. How do we address political patronage? I'm sure it's a very difficult issue and very politically sensitive, but I believe we can have a good start if we have engagement of the local communities directly to convince them that the developments that we have, the services that we provide are good for the community, and that they should not look at the short-term gains, but the long-term benefits of these systems. But also recruiting managers and leaders from within the community will help them feel like they belong to the services that we provide. The harder one will be how to engage the donor community, especially the European Union based, because many of their local legislations insist on not disenfranchising project affected persons. But we need to convince them that in the local settings that we operate in, some of the small incentives that are provided are seen as huge, and therefore we should try to modify our strategy. Addressing the hardcore communities will be through sharpening of our laws and policies that make processing of scrap or illicit scrap unattractive. For example, we could provide tax breaks for anyone who can prove the source of his raw materials, and anyone who do the other way around can have negative sanctions against them. about economic opportunities. Again, these people can be made to understand that it's not sustainable to operate using stolen scrap. In fact, in the case of Uganda, I know 2 steel factories that broke down, that had shut down after they finished buying the scrap from our dilapidated railway network. But I think the most forward-looking solutions are the technology solutions. We need to recognize that there is always going to be vandalism on the systems that we build, and therefore we need to have appropriate design for infrastructure. For example, if we can have higher embankments and replace all steel sleepers with concrete sleepers, have vandal-proof fittings, and instead of cable and other earth-based communication systems, if we introduce digital satellite communication. I know this is coming as a natural development for some of the new and high-speed networks, but we need also to adopt this maybe in a more appropriate level for the smaller railway networks. In heavily encroached areas, heavily populated areas, we need to create bypasses, overpasses, and underpasses. This is a solution that Uganda Railways is adopting for the areas around Kampala that are heavily encroached upon. We also need to adopt robust rolling stock designs that make it very hard for people to access cables and other soft components. For high-speed trains that is possible, we can also have embedded cabling along the track, and in some cases we may need to have separation walls and electric fencing to protect the infrastructure. Now, in conclusion, we need to recognize that vandalism is a very serious security problem that affects railway safety. And therefore, in whatever we plan, it must be central in our strategies and programs. There are many direct and underlying causes of vandalism. They therefore require varying solutions, ranging from social-political to engineering and technology solutions. Governments and development partners need to review their policies, laws, and practices to protect better the railway assets for safe railway operations. I believe that if we have this, then we will be able to address railway safety and have a sustainable rail operation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kateeba. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I don't have any specific questions to you, but I have a few comments I'd like to make. You make very valuable points, especially around the inclusion of the communities in protecting the infrastructure and making sure that our rail infrastructure does not continue to get affected by theft and vandalism. This is a point that was raised by a previous speaker, where she emphasized the issue of maintaining the systems without degrading them. And also, while we do that, we make sure that we take ownership as the society, as the community, over and above the operators as well as the infrastructure owners. I do just have another question that just popped in here for you, Mr. Kateeba. The question is from Dr. Mabila, and it says, don't you think it is time for SADC to assemble a barrier removal team to deal with theft and vandalism. Would you like to respond to that?
Could you repeat the question?
Don't you think it is time for SADC to assemble a barrier removal team to deal with the theft and vandalism? This refers to the SADC region.
To have a barrier removal team?
Yes.
I think those are solutions that can be looked at. As I said, the solutions will be varied and they will depend on the local situation and especially affordability. In urban areas, for example, we really cannot do without permanent unmanned automatic barriers if we are going to keep, for example, level crossing lines. But also permanent barriers such as high walls and electric fences are going to become necessary. Of course, they divide communities and therefore they are not very attractive. But if we design the infrastructure with such communities in mind, then the bypasses, the underpasses would have been created in such a way that they don't divide communities. The communities across the lines can easily access the other side. And that will discourage people from jumping over or building over our reserves.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. The next question for you comes from Kenny Makati. Kenny is asking, will any amendments on legislation assist in curbing theft and vandalism if the society does not understand the impact of their actions within the railway environment?
I believe that any legislation to be helpful, it has to be developed with the local communities in mind, and they have to get involved. For example, I know that a lot of people do not benefit
I think I'm losing Charles there from connectivity issues. Charles, if you can still respond without your video being on, please go ahead. Can you hear me? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will then on that point, there's another comment that is just came through, but on that point, I will just get myself ready to welcome our last but not least speaker. Oh, Charles, you're back. You've got another 2.5 minutes to finish off the question. You can do so without your video so that you will see if you can improve your connectivity that way. Please go ahead, sir.